Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, August 2nd. Taking a look at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, we see an area, this is actually a cutoff low, producing seas in the 26-foot range aimed at New Zealand, but nowhere up towards our forecast area, or even at South America for that matter. Also, another gale is working its way into southeast Australia, really targeting Tasmania, and again, pushing no swell towards our forecast area. Otherwise, a rather calm pattern is in control. First up, we take a look at jet stream level winds for the South Pacific Ocean. These winds, up about 30,000 feet, help support the formation of storms, and when those storms do form, help direct their track. Currently, we see nothing of particular interest. We're looking for troughs. Here is a trough here. That is a bow to the north in the southern branch of the jet stream. And yes, that is supporting gale development here. Here's Australia, Tasmania, right in that area, almost up into the Tasman Sea, but not quite. But notice, just east of there, the jet pushes hard south, and not only south of the Antarctic ice line, but into Antarctica proper, a major ridge pushing south. All this does is support high pressure between the two branches of the jet. But as we saw in the previous image, there is a cutoff low here. That is cut off. It's not supported by the southern branch of the jet, so it doesn't have a lot of energy to tap into. And then the northern branch here is running basically from west to east, just going right into South America. No troughs indicated. And this branch of the jet, the southern branch, continues basically on in south to South America, not ever really getting clear of even Antarctic ice, offering no support for gale formation. Let's put this into motion, and as you see, basically the same pattern. Here's a bit of a gale, a bit of a trough trying to get organized here in the far southeast Pacific on Tuesday, but Southern California is right about here, so that trough wouldn't even support gale development for even Southern California. Mainly, it looks like Peru, if anything, and maybe up into Mexico. Anyway, the trough here in the Tasman Sea, very weak, doesn't do a whole lot, and it sort of falls apart. The big ridge persists here into Friday, and we'll roll this out, continuing. So you notice the trough here tried to make it into the Southwest Pacific, but quickly got undercut, and nothing happening. And here you go back to the same pattern, the jet just raging way to the south, major split flow, and here we are 180 hours out and not any further ahead than we were as of right now. That doesn't look good for storm formation. So next we take a look at surface level pressure and surface level winds. And remember, the jet is basically doing this thing, and you can just see that in the surface level image. Here's a bit of a gale trying to organize right south of Tasmania, 35-knot winds, but basically all the energy is pushing right into land. Then the jet dives south, and look at that. You can actually see surface level wind direction is all heading south, and then follows the jet basically right along here. Here's the cutoff low we were talking about, 35-knot winds pushing right at New Zealand, offering nothing up in here. Let's put this into motion, see what happens. So we roll out here into Monday, Tuesday. A little bit of a gale tries to form, but again, the winds are basically pushing south here, not particularly interesting. And then another gale, theoretically, this is new on the charts, on Tuesday forms, 45-knot winds. This is a very tiny system. And let's see what it does. It actually, 45-knot winds, holds together and tracks a bit to the east. Look at that, not horrible. And then, and again, Antarctic ice is down around 63, 64. So it continues to the East Pacific on Friday, 35-knot winds. Here's another system. Look at this. This really talks to what's going on in the jet. Yeah, 45-knot winds, all aimed straight south at Antarctica. Anyway, we're into Friday. This gale continues. It's outside of the Southern California swell window now, but look at that, some almost 55-knot winds targeting maybe southern Chile or so. South winds continue here, high pressure. Notice a little bit of a gale here trying to organize. That's a cutoff gale, doesn't do anything. And here's another system, again targeting southern Chile, 180 hours out, so this would be Sunday night. So for right now, maybe one system of interest. Let's go see how those winds, what they do on the ocean surface. So here we are, significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. We're ignoring tropical activity. We'll talk about that in a moment in the northern hemisphere. But for right now, again, the gale pushing in Tasmania, basically no exposure In fact, here you go, just for laughs. Here's Hawaii. Here's the Great Circle Path. Up, there's the tip of New Zealand. There's the southern part of Tasmania. There's the window there. None of that energy is in that window, even going to Hawaii. Okay, and otherwise, here's this fetch pushing east. Nothing of real interest. We roll this out. First a little gale, pushing south, as we saw before. Then here's the next little one. What is that? 26-foot seas on Tuesday night. The tiniest area of 30-foot seas relative to Southern California. What is that? About the 208 degree track, it looks like. And yes, pushed up there, a little bit shadowed by Tahiti. Not particularly impressive. And then going due east, not even pushing north at all. It'd be doubtful if much, if any, swell results from that. And that continues on to the east, the southeast Pacific. And what was that? Oh, 26-foot seas. Again, we'll do this relative to Southern California on about the 190 degree track, theoretically, on Thursday night. Maybe some tiny background swell at best with maybe a 14 or 15 second period. And then here's a big fetch aimed due south. Again, we're 132 hours out. We're into a week out now. We're on Sunday, and pretty much that's it. This system is already out of the Southern California swell window. Notice those arrows there are perpendicular to the Great Circle tracks up into Southern California, so we would expect next to nothing from that. And then, as promised, we'll take a quick look here at the North Pacific. Two tropical systems, nothing else going on. Hurricane Guillermo and Typhoon Sudeller, I believe we're saying that right. Anyway, and we'll get into the detailed charts here for both these systems, but suffice it to say, you can watch the tracks, get a general idea. Guillermo coming very close to the Big Island, supposed to pass just north of it, but below hurricane status when that happens. Sudeller working its way to the west-northwest. No recurvature expected to the northeast, which is a little bit surprising. If El Nino were as coupled as everyone says, one would expect that it would make a bit of a turn to the northeast. A secondary system behind it is projected. It also does not, makes a little bit of a turn to the northeast, but nothing real significant, though it's very early in the year here too. So otherwise, and we'll just run through this real quick again. We'll sort of breeze and look up here, see if there's anything going on in the pure North Pacific, and we're not seeing it. So whatever is happening, it's all related to tropical development. Let's go take a quick look at the tropical charts. Here we are, Guillermo. Here's Hawaii, the Big Island. Currently, here we are, Sunday, 18Z run. Guillermo peaked out, 80-knot winds. It was forecast up to 90 knots, now only 80 knots. Taking a west-northwest track, and by about Wednesday evening, being north of the Big Island, with winds forecast in the 45-knot range, and then just barely, that's tropical storm force, and falling apart quickly, passing pretty close to, well, almost right over the northern tip of Maui. But again, winds in the 40-knot range. This is good for, certainly for wind swell, and a little bit more, probably pretty sizable wind swell on exposed breaks. And as long as the eye stays north of the islands, then theoretically the flow would be offshore on east-facing shores of any of these islands, so something to look for. Otherwise, Typhoon Sudeller in the far west Pacific, north of Guam, winds 105 knots, very strong indeed, and only forecast to get stronger as it gets into the fourth. Here you go, 145-knot winds. And that's on, what's that, Tuesday or so, right in here. That is 167 mile an hour. Certainly a very strong Cat 5 hurricane indeed. Not surprising given the El Nino base state that's in play. Would be nice to see that thing recurve, but again, it's very earlier in the year. You wouldn't expect to see that into the, at the earliest, maybe mid-August or so, and normally more in the September to October time frame. Anyway, moving in, starting to fade on the 7th, 125-knot winds, approaching the northern tip of Taiwan. So something to look for. In terms of swell, nothing in terms of our forecast area. Information only here. And then finally, the jet stream for the North Pacific Ocean. Not so much anything to do with surf or swell, but more looking for clues of El Nino's coupling with the atmosphere in the northern hemisphere. See if it's doing anything yet. So the jet was really quite solid the whole way through July. We think, and into the later part of July, we think a lot of that might have been the fact that the MJO was in the active state and certainly juicing up the juicing up the jet stream. The MJO has backed off now considerably in the inactive state, and the jet stream has taken the proportional hit. But let's just roll this out and see. You notice as we get into this, the jet stream kind of does wake up, and here we are about 45 north, and we're into Wednesday night or so, and there is a cohesive flow forecast to build into the weekend, making it the whole way across the North Pacific. This is actually a pretty good sign, and with some decent winds. I mean, it's still pretty meager by winter's terms, but considering that we're just barely out of July into early August, this is not bad at all. It suggests, of course, that El Nino is having influence on the atmosphere, and there's a host of other indicators that suggest the same thing. This is just sort of a standard thing we look for in terms of being able to goose up storms to produce surf. If you're looking at El Nino from a purist standpoint, you might be looking at other data, but again, most of our focus is how does the weather support storm formation relative to generating surf. With that said, let's go take a dive into the El Nino status. First up, Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. As you saw on the charts, there is a cutoff low south of Tahiti, and what we didn't show you on the charts is there's this perpetual high pressure system that's setting up over Australia. That is what is driving the SOI negative. Here we go, daily numbers, minus 29.6. We are not in the active phase of the MJO, and yet we are having good, solid negative numbers. The 30-day running average, minus 13. Not great. It was down to 20.49 here in mid-July. That was when we were in the height of the active phase of the MJO. But here is the really interesting thing. The 90-day running average, minus 13.32. Moving towards where we want to be. Well, let's say we get down to 15, minus 18, and that is not unreasonable that we could be approaching that in the next several weeks. That would be a great sign of El Nino. And again, we talk about coupling of El Nino and its influence on the atmosphere. That would be a sure and obvious sign if we get down into the 15 or below range and it holds for a while. That's the 90-day running average. So for right now, considering we're in the inactive state of the MJO, things are looking extremely good. And here you go again, the 30-day running average, just over time, 2 years worth. See where we are, see where we've been. Certainly much lower. We're in a little bit of a ramp up, but we expect this to start falling with those daily numbers going back deeply negative. When we get down here into the 20 range for the 30-day running average, we're in good shape, and we would like to see it hold there for a while. That would be the sign of a strong El Nino. And just to let you know, here in a few minutes, we're going to start throwing in some new charts too. We tend to like to keep the same charts running time after time so that everyone gets a sense of continuity. If we jump and change the format of the program all the time, then you don't get the sense of how does this chart compare to the week before that, 6 months before. So we tend to go over the same territory, and just to give you a sense of continuity in how things are. Anyway, so here we go. We're looking at surface level wind anomalies. This is at the 850 millibar level. We're looking for westerly anomalies. That's a sign of El Nino, or at least the active phase of the MJO. Certainly we have light westerly anomalies way in the far west Pacific. There's our tropical system. Also what appears to be some sort of a tropical system south of the equator as well. Strong westerly anomalies on the equator in association with that low pressure system. Dual low pressure systems. One would say this is almost a westerly wind burst, and the reality is it is not driven by the MJO, but driven by an equatorial Rossby wave, and we'll get into that in a minute too. But what we need to know is we have westerly anomalies. They are strong. Westerly anomalies create Kelvin waves, that is warm water pushing it to the east, and that's what helps get El Nino going. Anyway, we continue off to the east. Those westerly anomalies die off, and we actually have weak easterly anomalies south of Mexico, and then a pretty tame pattern. A week from now, we see weak easterly anomalies in the far western Kelvin wave generation area, but as we move our way to the east, weak westerly anomalies again, the thought being that that equatorial Rossby wave that's driving all this starts falling apart, and then we get to see what's really going on with the base state of El Nino without being influenced by anything else. And see, we still have westerly anomalies here south of the equator. We haven't seen a lot of that so far. Most of the activity has all been north of the equator. To see it south of the equator is a good thing. And then we continue on to the east a week out, and then basically a dead neutral pattern. Now, of course, remember, these charts are up at the 850 millibar level, up about 4,500 feet. Let's go see what's going on down at the surface. Actually, before we do that, let's just go back a couple days, July 7th, and we're just looking here. So here's Australia, now the Philippines here, U.S. up here, South America. Westerly winds on the equator. You want to draw a box roughly from about 135 to 170 west, about 3 to 5 degrees either side of the equator. This is what we call the Kelvin wave generation area. If you have westerly anomalies in there, they blow hard enough, even light westerly anomalies, you start taking warm water that's typically in this area. It starts moving to the east, falls to depth down about 200 meters, even down to 300 meters, and then works its way the entire way across the Pacific, hits Ecuador, the Galapagos, starts gurgling up on the surface, creating a warm pool here, and that is the signature of El Nino. Anyway, the 27th, westerly anomalies. Building westerly anomalies on the 28th, the 29th, 30th, and even into the 31st. So we have, this is this equatorial Rossby wave interacting with an El Nino base date, creating westerly anomalies. And very nice. This is good to help push more warm water to the east. And down at the surface, you can see the very same thing. So this is from the TAO buoy array, actual buoys on the ocean surface. You cannot argue with the data. And this is not anomalies. This is actual winds. And here we go. Strong westerly winds. This was as of yesterday, August 1st, at 170 east, and a general westerly pattern in this area. When you look at the actual anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year, for this location of the ocean surface, very strong westerly anomalies, and I'm ignoring the temperature data right now, but everyone can see it for themselves, quite warm in the far East Pacific. But what we're saying is it's almost like another mini westerly wind burst is occurring right now. We saw that in the previous charts too, with the multiple days of westerly anomalies. It's not just a little flash in the pan. And yet, here's another way to look at this. So this is the whole planet laid out. The Kelvin wave generation area is roughly here to about here, let's say. Okay, and the oranges and red are westerly anomalies, blues are easterly anomalies. We're looking for westerly anomalies in the Kelvin wave generation area. Certainly, massive westerly wind burst occurred it actually started early June, went the whole way through July, stalled for all of about 2 days, started up again, and then here we are. This is where the Rossby wave came into play, and we got some new charts that we're going to show you in a second that show actually how that all comes to play. Needless to say, here we go. We got, we'll start on the 28th to, what is that, about 4, 5, 6, maybe a week-long, another mini westerly wind burst, not covering as much area as the previous one, but still just this continuous westerly wind anomaly pattern, if not out-and-out westerly winds, and that is expected to continue right in the heart of the Kelvin wave generation area for the next week. A very good sign, classic El Nino. So what's the future hold? Where do we go from here? Well, this is the outgoing long-wave radiation model, the statistical model. And as we see, if you saw blues, that would suggest the active phase of the MJO. We don't see any of that. We don't see any oranges or yellows either, suggesting the inactive phase, a dead neutral MJO pattern per the statistical model. If we go to the dynamic model, it suggests, if anything, a weak, perhaps 5 days or so of what one might classify as a sort of a taste or a tease of the active phase of the MJO. All this is really saying is that there'll be more clouds in this area, less reflectivity off the ocean surface. That does not necessarily equate to westerly winds, certainly not a full-blown MJO. But you know what? a dead neutral MJO pattern is also a sign of what happens when the El Nino base state, that is, when El Nino gets developed enough, takes over, couples with the atmosphere, and basically mutes the MJO, and El Nino just takes over. And so that's what these charts suggest. You go to the upper level chart, again, same sort of deal. The blues and the greens suggest areas of potential for precipitation, which would suggest the active phase of the MJO. We're not seeing any of that. If anything, a weak tendency maybe towards the inactive phase, and that is through mid-August into maybe September 1st, and then a weak tendency for the active phase after that. But really, looking at this chart, this is the same as no MJO at all, and no real support for precipitation one way or the other. So we showed you this chart last week. It's kind of ugly looking because there's a lot going on. Busy is a better word for it. But when you get into it, it's like some of the other charts we just looked at. The Kelvin wave generation area runs from, look down here, about 130 east to about 170 west. The oranges and the reds are the are westerly anomalies. The deep reds are actually surface west winds. Now what's cool about this is the MJO, the active phase would be like here, these dark black lines, the inactive phase, the dash black. So you can see here we were in the middle of June going into July, very deep active state of the MJO. Also notice the red is the Rossby waves working through that. You notice when you get some of these reds intersecting with the MJ, you get super bursts of westerly winds. And so here we are currently. Notice no MJO. If anything, this is like a little mini inactive phase of the MJO. But here's the Rossby wave that we were talking about. And again, here's those deep westerly winds. So certainly that is what's driving things right now. Also notice you can see tropical storm formation in and clustered around the MJO, and for that matter also around Rossby waves. So things that help support cyclonogenesis in the equatorial Pacific. So where do we go from here? Here's a month forecast. Certainly a lighter bunch of westerly anomalies, but westerly anomalies, just the same forecast. Things sort of back off a little. No real Rossby waves interaction that supports westerly winds. But also notice here the gray lines. This is what they call like a low-pass filter. It's really a proxy for El Nino and the El Nino base state. And notice here, just one line up here in the May time frame. But notice when we got into June, now there's like, I'll call them isobars. They're not really isobars. But and then we get into 3 here. And what that is talking to is the relative strength of the El Nino base state. Okay? Which basically is saying here, at least in this point, we're in a strong base state, and it's more or less supposed to continue for the next month. So again, a busy chart, but it helps provide a little bit deeper understanding of what's going on with the atmosphere. And given this, now we can go look even further into the future and see the interaction of El Nino, Rossby waves, MJO, and see what's to come. So here we go. Same sort of chart, but the timeline's different. Here's the past here working its way up to the future. Again, the scale, we're looking the area from about 130 east to 170 where all this is going on. The reds and the yellows, again, are westerly anomalies. Here's where we are, a little mini westerly wind burst. Here's the big westerly wind burst in late June and July, and then another one that occurred back in May. Now here's how things get really fun. We'll overlay. Here's the MJO, active phase, right here in the June-July time frame. Another one back in the April-May time frame. Certainly one would expect to see westerly anomalies during that, and we do. And then the inactive phase, and you notice the yellows and the reds sort of fade out. Here's where we are right now. We're actually in the inactive phase, but we have some westerly winds, and that's supposed to continue. Now notice we get another sort of inactive signal, this per the CFS model. What we're really looking at, starting at about 130, which would get 130 east, which would get us out into about here, on about we got to go till almost mid-September till the active phase of the MJO kicks back in. And notice, per this model, and again, who's going to believe a model that goes 3 months out? Well, probably not a whole lot of people, but it's something to look forward to and gives you sort of a sense of where we are. And if we do this chart week after week, we'll sort of see how well it verifies or whether it verifies at all, whether it's just all a bunch of nonsense. But fun to watch, fun to speculate just the same. Anyway, stronger westerly anomalies in October per this, this model. So if you have westerly anomalies, another Kelvin wave generated, and we'll just say roughly 3 months, so that's October to November, December, January. We're talking about another Kelvin wave hitting in January of 2016 if this all plays out as expected. That's an interesting thought. Anyway, Rossby waves. Okay, there's your intersection of Rossby waves for winds, to enhance winds. Another one here. We see no Rossby wave activity per the CFS model, and a little bit here maybe, but not doing a whole lot. So the MJO is certainly helping, but the low pass, here you go. This speaks to your base state. Look at this. 1, 2, 3 isobars, 4 isobars. So starting about right now, and then you go to, they're not isobars again, but anyway, 5 isobars in the October time frame. This suggests the evolution of El Nino and where it continues to build and get more momentum and, again, more influence in the atmosphere. And this is pretty typical, actually. You get into October, that's when El Nino really starts waking up and doing its thing. Early signs are maybe mid-August, certainly by mid-September, and we're pretty much on track per this for some sort of significant activity in the West Pacific in late September. We've got to get through this window right here. So, we're looking pretty good till about the mid-August time frame, but between mid-August and I'll say mid-September, there's a big hole of nothing. No Rossby waves, no MJO, inactive MJO, if anything, not a whole lot of westerly anomalies. The only thing that's driving the boat at that point is the base state of El Nino. So we'll see where we're at when we get there, assuming one believes this model. But it's pretty cool, nice thing to look at, and it gives you a sense of where we're going and where we've been. Next up, sea surface temperature anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. A clear El Nino signature is in play. That is, warmer than normal temperatures right in this area. This is where you want to look. If you don't want to see something like this with blues in this area. We certainly don't see that. We clearly see what looks to be a well-developed or developing El Nino situation. But it is not as concentrated as it's been. If anything, it appears that we've lost some ground. There's less concentration of the deep reds in this image, and basically all the data we've seen, and we're going to show you some of that, supports that theory. That is, we've kind of stalled here a little bit. Let's just go back. The 13th. Look at how much more concentrated temperatures were in this area, and we'll just toggle back and forth so you can see it. Not a good sign for this time of year. But the thought being, we're in between Kelvin waves. That is, there was a big Kelvin wave that hit. It peaked on about the 14th, and that was right about here. Things got nice and warm. And it's not like there isn't piles of warm water subsurface getting more Kelvin waves getting ready to erupt. There certainly is. We're just sort of in a pause right now, and we're not too alarmed. But if you want to play the game of, well, how does this El Nino compare to the record 97 El Nino? Because there's a lot of that kind of energy going on around the web, and we'll just squash that real quick. Look at this. This was 97 on August 2nd. Very deep reds, and it was just like a freight train. It only gets deeper and more pronounced as you move into the fall. We are nowhere close to that. I mean, we're respectable, but we don't think at this point in time that this El Nino is going to reach 97 strengths. But still, that was the strongest. Here you look at it. This is the strongest El Nino ever. Here's where it was at this point in time. The 82-83 El Nino was the second strongest. We don't have data for that, but it developed a lot later in the year and came on quicker. So there's no telling how this will play out. Let's dig into some of the details real quick here. So here's high-res data for July 14th. This was the peak of the last Kelvin wave impacting. Here's the Galapagos, here's Ecuador. Look at this, 4-degree plus anomalies building along the coast here. And then we went into the 28th of July, and this is just like a couple of days ago, and this was as bad as it got. You know, and if this is as bad as it gets, it's not too bad, but here's where the bottom sort of fell out. This is the worst image. There's still some, what is that? No, 4-degree anomaly in pockets, but also areas of a lot less. And so here we go, looking over the next days, July 29th, 30th, 31st, and the 1st. And notice, we'll just run through this sequence again. Look in this area. You notice, you see warm water starting to build into the area. Not super strong, but we sense that whatever pause we were in might already be over, and things are starting to work their way to a better place. But notice the Galapagos here are actually kind of still in the cooler regime relative to where they were. And here's actual data. Here's the actual anomaly, temperature anomalies for normal for the Galapagos station. It's a virtual station. It really doesn't exist, but it's all from satellite data. But you can see water temperatures were up on the, oops, here we'll slide this over so you can see the whole thing. July 14th, we were at the 12th, 4.7 degrees, another 4.7 on the 16th. Another one, 4.9 there on the 17th. But then notice here, the bottom sort of fell out, down at 3.1. Today's reading 3.7, roughly. So we'll be watching this to see if the temperatures come up. But we expect that they will, and we'll be back into the 4 to 4.2 degree range probably pretty quickly. Because, again, there is piles of warm water subsurface just waiting to come gurgling up. And yet one more image. We've seen this one before. Here's actual surface anomalies. Notice the expanse of 2-degree anomalies going out to, what is that, 145 almost west. So these warm waters continue to expand to the west, exactly what one would want to expect, but knowing that there's a little pocket of cold water or cooler water, that might get, well, it certainly will get caught by the trades, work its way in here and sort of maybe put a crimp in some of this. But also notice 1.5 degree anomalies are out almost to the date line. Very warm indeed. And here's yet another way to view it. The Nino 1.2 area, that's that area right there near the Galapagos in Ecuador. You can see spiked up to 3 degree multiple times in the July time frame, and now things have bottomed out, but they're starting to work their way up. This is averaged over the entire Nino 1.2 area. We've been zoomed in. Then the Nino 3.4 area, which is further out to the west, like south of Hawaii, you can see it has taken a little bit of a hit here too, 1.3 degrees, where it's been consistently in the 1.5 range since late June or so. We expect that will work its way to the surface or start warming up again shortly. And real quickly, subsurface temperatures. Now again, we talked about westerly winds in the West Pacific. That's over here, East Pacific here. This is depth down 300 meters. Westerly anomalies take warm water in the surface in the West Pacific, push it to depth. It works its way to the east, hits the Galapagos and Ecuador, gurgles to the surface, gives you what's known as a Kelvin wave. Anyway, it's not the actual temperatures, it's the anomalies from difference where you can see the Kelvin wave. Here we go. This is actually 2 Kelvin waves, one now 6-degree anomalies lurking below the surface. This is at 110, so that's a little bit to the west of the Galapagos Islands, but the assumption, and notice part of the buoy array is out here, so there's no data. The assumption is this is all working its way in and will be gurgling up off of Ecuador shortly. Now, this all looks like one massive Kelvin wave, but the reality is this massive westerly wind burst that occurred in the late June, early July time frame. Warm water is still falling to depth. All this right here is part of that. What's happening is just creating this giant reservoir with months worth of warm water here. And we've seen from the models more westerly anomalies are to continue, so we don't expect this pool to get depleted at all. If anything, we're a little bit surprised that there was even a pause. We thought it would be a continuous upwelling of warm water, but apparently there are a couple little bubbles in the line here, and that's what's happening. Real quickly, another view. This one showing, well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6-degree anomalies in this modeled version, and that's pretty much what the other one said too. And notice here's more warm water falling to depth. This is our next Kelvin wave starting to develop way out towards the date line. It will eventually merge into all this and just continue to feed the flow of warm water to the east. And yet one more view, satellite view, sea surface height anomalies, a proxy for what's going on below the surface. If you have warm water at depth, it takes the surface of the ocean. If you strip out all the waves, the tides, everything. And in this suggests as well 15 centimeter above normal anomalies here. This is right where we saw before all this, a massive Kelvin wave, basically extending from the date line the whole way into the equator. Notice here, there's your little pocket of just basically neutral anomalies, not a whole lot going on, and that is what is the cool pool that we saw. This from July 27th, so we expect this warm energy is already working its way into the coast, if not there already. And finally, one other view, total heat anomalies above about 300 meters. Here you go, August of last year, Kelvin wave, October, upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle. And then we got into March, 1 Kelvin wave, a second Kelvin wave in the June time frame, and then here we go. Here's our third one developing. And notice you could say, well, upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave in between. I don't know if it's real. Yeah, maybe, I guess, from a purist standpoint. But the reality, it's just been a continuous flood of warm water to the east. Here is that little pocket of less than as warm water that we're seeing occur right now. But anyway, more warm water on the way. We looked at the model. We saw more westerly anomalies. That means yet more warm water if one is to believe the models. So to go real quick here, and we're running over, we didn't even talk about 2 small southern hemiswells that are working their way up into California. They'll be here this week. Small is the operative word. Beyond that, not a whole lot going on surf-wise. El Nino-wise, things are certainly in a very active state. Lots of westerly anomalies, lots of warm water moving to the east, Kelvin waves in flight. The current situation, not as strong as 97. We're not expecting it to be as strong as 97, but the final forecast suggests, and here's the interesting thing, again, still 2 degrees above normal temperature anomalies. That would be a strong El Nino in the November-December time frame. Also notice, though, the most recent members of this ensemble run, the blue numbers, are suggesting perhaps a weakening down into the 1.9, even 1.8. That's probably, I assume, the picking up on the cooler water that's showing up on the charts now, and perhaps some weakening in the westerly anomalies over the next month before we get into the next MJO cycle. But still, regardless, now in terms of comparison to 97, 97 was up at about a 2.7, I believe, at its peak. This is the PDF corrected, probably the most conservative of all of them for the CFS version 2. But still, we're looking at, we would say, a strong El Nino at this point in time. So, our El Nino is developing nicely. We would like to see it maybe even stronger, but given where we're at, certainly a lot of warm water in play. This winter is going to be very interesting. We think precipitation for California to result as well. This is not a weak El Nino, even at its weakest state, and or the weakest estimate. So things are looking very good. Small swell on the way. So that's it for this week. We'll do this again next Sunday, same time, same channel. See you then. Go surfing, get some waves. Thanks.